Hello, I wanted to do a video today in regards to Cunningfolk and Charming Cattle because it plays a huge, massive part in British folk magic, and I actually went through a huge patch um, just charming and trying and curing animals. And first and foremost, I did actually do a previous video, but Dylan was like, too fiddly, and was just like, I want to get back in my tank. But I wanted to show you her, and she's absolutely fine. She's fully recovered. And I can't thank you guys enough when I actually done that post on my Facebook, and I don't normally do things like that, but she is my baby. I love her to absolute bits, and the idea of her not being there anymore just ripped me apart. And it was very, very tough, but she's pulled through. So I wanted to talk today about cattle charming and animal charming, and this played a major part way back when because people relied for cattle as and their livestock as part of their welfare, as part of their living, and so cunning folk played a major part in this, and this is goes within the cunning folk territory. In terms of charming cattle, they really did play a massive part of this. So I'm going to read a couple of things from the Devil's Plantation. Okay, and so I wanted to read two things. So be warned, the second is very, very graphic. Mrs. H, formerly of Horse Heath, tells how her mother had a beautiful brood of young ducks, and when only a fortnight old they were bewitched and covered with vermin. These young ducks just turned on their backs, kicked up their little feet, and were dying fast. Fearing she might lose the whole brood, the good woman sent to the shop for an ounce of new pins and stuck them into one of the dead ducks. Then, without telling anyone, she made up a good fire, and at 12 o'clock at night, without telling anyone what she was going to do, she put the duck well into the middle of the fire, and before the duck had been burning 10 minutes, her fears were affirmed. The witch came screaming to the door, making the most agonising noise, for the pain caused by the pins in the burning duck had entered into the witch, and we are told the rest of the ducks in the morning were found to be cured of their pests. So the next one's pretty graphic. A woman I knew 43 years ago had been employed by my predecessor to take care of his poultry. At the time I came to make her acquaintance, she was a bedridden, toothless crone with chin and nose all but meeting. She did not discourage in her neighbours the idea that she knew more than people ought to know, and had more power than others had. Many years before I knew her, it happened one spring that the ducks which were a part of her charge failed to lay eggs. She at once took it for granted that the ducks had been witched. This misbelief involved very shocking consequences, for it necessitated the idea that so diabolical an act could only be combated by a diabolical cruelty. And the most diabolical act of cruelty she could imagine was that of baking alive in a hot oven one of the ducks, and that was what she did. The sequence of thought in her mind was that the spell had been laid on the ducks was that of preternaturally wicked willfulness, that this spell could only be broken through intensity of suffering, and in this case death by burning, that the intensity of the suffering would break the spell in one roasted to death, and that the spell broken in one would be altogether broken, that is, in all the ducks. Shocking, however, is this method of exercising the ducks. There was nothing in it original. Just about 100 years before, everyone in the town of the neighbourhood of Ipswich had heard, and many had believed, that a witch had been burnt to death in her own house at Ipswich by the process of burning alive one of the sheep she had bewitched. It was curious, but it was convincing as curious, that the hands and feet of this witch were the only parts of her that had not been incinerated. This, however, was satisfactorily explained by the fact that the 4 feet of the sheep, which had been suspended over the fire, had not been destroyed in the flames that had consumed its whole entire body. Very, very cruel, and I do not enforce and endorse it. However, I can't ignore folklore, and that is within folklore. So, Rowan. rowan tree, the rowan, also known as ruche in Ogham, was hung up on barns, was made into crosses, and was actually hung, and it was also tied into cattle's tails as well. My brother had a problem with some absolute assholes that were actually stealing horses, and so I gave him a rowan cross to hold and put in his barn for his for his horses, for their safety. It wasn't just rowan. Scythes were also hung across barns to protect from witch hares. So it was believed that the witch hare would be cut and it would slice the witch hare in half. And they were also hung above homes as a way of protecting, particularly in East Anglia. St Columba in Scotland also was a saint that was petitioned to protect from cattle. And Midsummer as well, if you look at the Midsummer fires, there were two fires that were built, and cattle was quite often passed through the two Midsummer fires so that it would cure the cattle, renew that protection and that healing and regeneration for the cattle, and protect them against any any bewitchments or any ailments that the cattle had been overlooked. So in 1607, there was a Scottish charmer named Barty Patterson claimed to use the following cure to unbewitched cattle. I charm thee for arrow shot, for door shot, for window shot, for eye shot, for tongue shot, for liver shot, for lung shot, for heart shot, all the most in the name of the Father, Son and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Now, a lot of people believe that the Fae folk played a massive part in the ailments of cattle, and so there would be various things, particularly iron would be hung around in barns to protect the cattle from any mischievous fairies. So a lot of charms would be actually written and hung up on the doors or the walls of the stable, or it could be your pet's tank, it could be anywhere. You guys will have to pause this. I hope you can see it. So you're going to have to pause it and make what you can out of it. And I just realised this is back to front like a mirror. Fail. But anyway, pause it and see what you make out of that. But that would be written upon the barn. And another thing that would be written would be an old farmer in 1880 to 1890, an old farmer in Pendle Forest had this wrote on a piece of paper and hung above the door. So once again, pause this and you have to decipher it. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to do some work, okay? There we go. And that was written in Pendle in Lancashire, so it's some Lancashire charming for you. Also, the Icelandic staves have a huge amount of, not a huge amount, but there are a couple of Icelandic staves that talk about cattle and curing cattle and charming cattle. So this is a symbol if a cow's milk is bloody. So you carve this on oak and then you milk the cow over that. Mary Butters in 1807, who was known as a Protestant witch, which was a little bit of a rarity because most Cunningfolk were actually Catholic. She was a wise woman, and what she done was she took the cow's milk and she churned it for some time, observing the churn, and then she drew a circle around the churn and muttered over it the charm over some words. And then she washed what was left of that, the milky butter, in a self-running stream to try and cleanse away that illness and ailment. Also, there were witch marks that were made as well. Now, these were in houses. You find a lot of stuff in folk magic where the same things to protect houses. Not all the time, but there are a lot of written charms and a lot of incantations to protect houses. Also used to protect stables and cattle. So these were some witch marks that we used, and these were also some witch marks that we used as well. And these were carved on the beams normally. Some of them, like this, the V and the M, would be used to represent the Virgin Mary, and would be used to charm and inscribe protection into that. And so, let me just check. Okay, yeah. There it is. So, there's another spell here. At Easter, you must take certain drops that lie uppermost of a holy candle and make a little wax thereof, so steal some of the wax from a holy candle at Easter. And upon Sunday morning, you light it and you hold it so it may drop in between and on the horns and ears of the beast with the same wax. And you have to do that in a cross. And you say, in nomine pratiset fili. Okay, so you're going to have to pause it, and my writing is very scratchy, very scruffy there. But that was something that was said. And then the rest of the wax that's left, you stick it crosswise about the stable, and your cattle will never be bewitched again. So there are a couple of charms here, but there is a lot of things generally in British folklore to charm cattle, and you can use this for your animals. Please do not go burning one of your animals alive in an oven. No, I will never forgive myself. But I'm not gonna just talk about one aspect of folklore and ignore the rest. There is a huge amount of witchcraft, actual witchcraft rather than Cunningfolk craft, that is all about harming cattle, which is one of the things that witchcraft was actually reputable for. It was one of the things that it came within the territory of witchcraft, of laming someone's cattle, of making their crops fail. So I want to talk about what I've done with little Dylan. I'm not going to go into everything so much, but this is one of the charms that I used for her. So this is an abracadabra charm, and it means I create when I speak. And I love that. I think there's so much power in that. I create when I speak. And so it was seen as a way in folk magic, as a way of an illness either decreasing, which would be that way, and the other way, going down, or this would be good health increasing to the person, good health increasing. And I used this for Dylan, and I used snake skin. And so just as the snake sheds its skin, so shall Dylan shed her illness. And this is actually horsehair taken from my brother's stable. And she was actually pregnant, the horse, and Dylan actually had a problem with her eggs. So it was a fertility thing. So she had a very successful birth and passed the foal easily, and the foal was fine. And so I used that energy and said, just as a horse is strong, so may Dylan be strong. And the interesting thing is, after I'd done this charm, Dylan shed all her skin. She shed all her skin completely, which I saw as a fantastic sign for that. So yeah, it's not the prettiest looking thing, but it's what one of my friends got me. It's a little lizard, and so I had this here, that on there, and I put her shed skin around and lit a tea light every night for healing for her. There were other things that went into it, but I'm not going to go fully into it. So one last thing, and it was to cure a horse, and it would be an iron horse now, would be driven into the ground as a way to cure the horse from any bewitchments or overlooking, because a lot of the times illnesses and problems with cattle were seen as people witching them, people overlooking them, rather than them just being ill. It would be, this is the work of witchcraft, and that's where the Cunningfolk would step in and charm the cattle. So you can also, as well, these are, look away if you're squeamish, but these are little Dylan's eggs that were inside of her. However, in terms of a witchcraft perspective, because these eggs are septic, and because they were, hurting her and harming her, not that I would, but you could use this to make someone's cattle ill. You could use this, the sympathy of it, the sympathetic aspect of it, you could use it to make someone's cattle ill. Not that I would, but I did keep them, if in case anything comes in the future. I never would harm animals, but I just kind of, I don't know, I'm a bit of a hoarder when it comes to icky and gross things. I also had a cord here as well, which I tied, which is used a lot in Scottish charming, where the charmer would actually tie in the good intentions, and sometimes they would tie in these knots, and so as the knots unleashed, so the illness would be gone. But yes, that's my video. It's a little bit scattered, so I do apologise, but